Hey everybody, Shwazy here, and in today's video, I review the newly facelifted 2024 Mercedes Benz GLS 450. Hey everyone, before we dive into today's video, I want to tell you about Octane Coffee Company. It is the car-themed coffee company with a variety of different roasts paired with iconic names. You've got Big Block, Race Gas, The Goat. It's perfect for early morning cars and coffee or cruises down the canyon. It is the coffee for all car enthusiasts. Pick up your bag at octanecoffeecompany.com, link is down below, and get 10% off your first order using promo code Octane10. Now back to the video. Okay, so the GLS 450, this is newly facelifted for 2024, but before we get into the details, let's briefly talk about the model history. So this thing actually came out as the GL back in 2006, and it was a unibody platform similar to the ML back in the day, and it was the first three-row crossover offered by Mercedes. Well, fast forward to 2016, they renamed it the GLS to kind of fit in with the nomenclature that Mercedes was using for its other models, because this is essentially the S-Class of Mercedes SUVs. And then in 2019, they announced this third generation model. And then here in 2024, they've done a small facelift to better compete with some of the competition. Okay, now let's talk about some of the changes for 2024. First off, let's talk about the headlights. These remain mostly unchanged from the prior version. So you have this LED running light, you got these two LED bulbs, of course your LED headlights, and these look really good at night. So when you unlock the car, you have this amber strip, and then when you lock it, it'll kind of flash at you, and then at night this thing lights up. Looks really good in the evening. The main change up front really has to do with this front grille. It's been revised here for 2024. Mine in particular has this brushed aluminum look to it, but you can get this midnight package where this entire front end will be blacked out. Looks really menacing, very Mercedes-like, but you have this big Mercedes logo over here, and I think the grille has been a little bit enlarged here for 2024, and of course they have different styles and different designs. Now moving down here, also small revisions from the 2023 model year, but very similar to other Mercedes models. For your front splitter, you had some nice aluminum mixed with that metallic blue color. In case you're wondering what this color is, it's actually a new option for 2024. It's called Twilight Blue Metallic. There's not too much metallic spec in it. It's kind of like a gloss blue, but it looks really good. Very rich looking color. Now, moving over to the side, let's talk about the side profile because that's remained unchanged from the 2023 model year. The vehicle remains the same length, which is 205 inches long, which is very similar to the competition, but it's still a really good looking vehicle overall. Now, zooming in on these wheels, my particular vehicle has the AMG line package, which includes these AMG wheels. You get AMG floor mats inside and a sportier steering wheel and a couple other options. But this is a 5-spoke setup. You've got 21-inch wheels, and these are Pirelli Scorpion Zero tires. In terms of sizing, you're looking at 275/45 in the front, and then over here in the back, you've got 315/40 R21s back here. And it's a pretty wide tire. I mean, 315s is pretty impressive for, you know, a non-AMG vehicle, but that's kind of what you get with getting the AMG line. It's kind of a light version of an AMG, and I like the look of these wheels. They look pretty nice, and I like how some of this brushed aluminum matches pretty well with the chrome accents on the side of the vehicle. So starting up front, of course, you've got turn signal indicators on your side view mirror. Blind spot monitoring is included on these as well, and you'll notice since this one doesn't have the midnight package, you'll have all these chrome trim pieces all throughout the vehicle, even on the roof rack, but I think it looks really good. I don't know if I'd want this blacked out. It kind of makes it look a little bit more upscale, a little bit more luxurious, and I do like the fact that you have these little fender flares that extend on the front and the rear as well. It's actually more noticeable in the rear that makes the tires kind of look like they stick out a little bit, giving it a wider stance than just your traditional, run-in-the-mill 3-row crossover. Now coming out back, the only real change they made back here for the 2024 facelift is revised taillights. So now you kind of have this 3-block setup. It reminds me a lot of kind of what you have on the GLB, and it looks pretty good, especially at night. You know, you have these 3 lights light up, and it looks pretty premium, pretty luxurious. Mercedes does a really good job with lighting. And then you have this chrome strip that goes all the way from the driver to the passenger side, the GLS 450 badging. And then moving up, your windshield wiper is not integrated into the spoiler, but that's because your spoiler is actually pretty small. Now moving down below that, very similar rear end to the 2023 model year. You got 2 exhaust ports with some more chrome, and then you've got your parking sensors down here as well. Now, while we're down here, I do want to mention that every single GLS as of 2024 comes with air suspension as standard, so you don't have to option for that. But if you choose the GLS 580, you can get something called the off-road package, which not only adds additional underbody protection so that you don't scrape things when you go off-road, but it also allows your air suspension to go up an extra inch of travel. So if you really plan on taking your GLS off-road, I'd opt for the 580 and pay for that package because you're going to want that additional ground clearance. But that pretty much finishes off the exterior updates for the 2024 model year. All right, now let's talk about what's going on under the hood of this GLS 450. This one being, of course, the entry-level trim. You get a 3-liter inline-6 turbocharged engine that's paired with this mild hybrid system. It's a 48-volt architecture that I've discussed in other Mercedes products. It's essentially just a beefed-up starter motor, and what it does is not only can it provide upwards of 21 horsepower, but it runs your accessory unit, your water pump, your air conditioning, so you no longer have a serpentine belt in the engine. Now, in terms of horsepower figures, it's actually been bumped up for 2024. You're talking 375 horsepower and 369 pound-feet of torque. The horsepower was about 362 last year, so a small increase over the prior year. In terms of fuel economy, it's not bad. You're talking 18 in the city and 23 on the highway. And this thing will do 0 to 60 in about 5.8 seconds. Now, we'll talk about my driving impressions when we get behind the wheel, but it's actually pretty quick. Now, all GLS models come standard with 4MATIC, and all of this power is sent through a 9-speed automatic transmission. But this isn't the only engine option you can get on the GLS. Now, moving up from there, you've got the GLS 580, which comes with a 4-liter twin turbocharged V8 that is also paired with that mild hybrid system. And that thing produces increased figures from 2023. We're talking 510 horsepower and 538 pound-feet of torque. It will do 0 to 60 in just about 4.7 seconds. Now, fuel economy is, of course, a little bit worse than this. We're talking 16 in the city, 21 on the highway. Now, if that's not enough power for you, you jump up into the AMG territory. We're talking GLS 63 AMG. That one comes with a hand-built 4-liter twin turbocharged V8 that produces a whopping 603 horsepower and 627 pound-feet of torque. It will do 0 to 60 in just about 4.1 seconds, but your fuel economy is even worse, 14 in the city, 19 on the highway. Now, stepping up from there in terms of price is actually a slightly weaker engine. We're talking the Maybach GLS 600. It's the top of the line of the GLS lineup. It's the most opulent, most luxurious, but it only comes with a 4-liter twin turbocharged V8 that produces 550 horsepower and 538 pound-feet of torque. So a little bit more than the 580, a little less than the GLS 63. Fuel economy on that one isn't much better. We're talking 15 in the city, 19 on the highway, and that one will do 0 to 60 in just about 4.8 seconds. So with this one being a 3-row crossover, chances are you're going to want to tow with it. So what's the towing capacity? Well, for 2024, you're looking at 7,716 pounds. Okay, now let's jump inside and talk about the interior. And just like pretty much every Mercedes I've reviewed, I think I love the interiors even more than the exteriors. Really nice use of materials, but we'll get to that in just a second. For 2024, there's not too many updates on the interior. The major one is really just the steering wheel. They've kind of brought it up to date with some of the other Mercedes products out there. It's very similar to the GLE I recently reviewed. And then they've also opened up some trim pieces and leather colors that were previously reserved for the Maybach version on the lower trim levels. So you can get additional accents that you couldn't previously get on the GLS 450 or the 580. And then lastly, they did update some of the software, so you have the latest MBUX system. But other than that, they really didn't need to change much. It's a really pretty cabin overall. Really nice materials all throughout. The dashboard, everything's soft touch. You've got a very luxurious vibe sitting in here. Now, in case you're wondering what color this is, it's called the Macchiato Beige with a natural wood grain dash. Now, starting off with the door panel, really nice soft touch materials all throughout the top, which you wouldn't expect anything else. You've also got some nice stitching on it. And then moving below that, you have this natural wood grain dash, which has kind of this texture to it, which feels really nice. And that extends all the way onto the dashboard and onto the passenger side. And then you've got your typical aluminum buttons over here for your seat controls. Heated and ventilated seats are standard on all GLS models, which is really nice. And then you also have a button on the driver door to control the passenger seat if you need to move remove it. In front of that is your standard 13 speaker Burmester audio system. And I gotta say, it sounds really good. Now, if this isn't enough for you, you can also option for, I believe, a 26 speaker Burmester audio system. I don't even know where they stick those speakers, but that I'm sure is gonna sound phenomenal. Now, what's cool here with this standard audio system is Mercedes says you can speak normally in the first row and it amplifies your voice into the second and third row. So the passengers back there can still hear you and possibly even respond without you having to yell to reach the passengers in the third row. That's a pretty cool feature. Moving below this wood grain dash, you have your ambient lighting, which is extended all the way throughout the interior, and it looks absolutely gorgeous. And that is standard on all GLS models as well. And then below that, you have your aluminum door handle and aluminum switches for your window controls and your side view mirrors as well. And then you have a soft touch padding over here for your armrest. Below that is just a storage compartment with a place for like a water bottle and then a button for you to open up your lift gate. Now moving inwards, if you guys have seen my review of the Mercedes GLE, or maybe you've sat in one before, you'll notice this interior is very similar. It's almost identical. The only difference here is it's a little bit wider, a little bit taller, but you know, they're siblings of each other. So if you like one, you're gonna like this one. Starting off with this updated steering wheel, they've added capacitive touch buttons. So whether you like that or not, there's no real physical buttons on the steering wheel. On the left-hand side at the top section of the steering wheel, you've got your buttons to control your center 12.3-inch instrument gauge cluster display. Now that's standard on all trim levels as well. You get a very vibrant colored, very intuitive, and also very robust 12.3-inch gauge cluster, and you can go through a variety of different themes. There's understated sport, there's classic, you could do a full screen navigation system, you got off-road modes, and then there's also a service mode if you want to see that. But I've mostly kept it in the classic mode. It has the 2 gauges, very vibrant, very nice looking, and then even in that mode you can cycle through various things like your MPG, your GPS, how well you've been maintaining your eco mode, and then just your general mileage information. So lots of stuff going on here, and it's very easy to control with this left-hand side of the steering wheel. And then below that section, you have your buttons for your adaptive cruise control. Now we'll talk about safety features here in the next section of the video, but that is how you regulate all of your adaptive and regular cruise control functionality. Moving to the right-hand side of the steering wheel, you have another set of buttons that look very similar to the left-hand side, but this set of buttons controls your center infotainment screen, which is also a 12.3-inch screen, also standard on all GLS models. And you know, I haven't used the functionality on the steering wheel as often as I thought, but what's nice here is you can swipe through all the different settings, all the different applications on your infotainment screen without ever having to take your hands off the steering wheel. Moving below that, you have your buttons to control your volume, your phone settings, and then your voice activation. And then you do have a favorites button that you can pre-program using the infotainment screen. Now, I will also mention that this steering wheel is tilt and telescoping, and that is standard on all trim levels. My particular vehicle also has the heated steering wheel option, so that's great for cold climates. To the left of the steering wheel are just your automatic lighting controls and your electronic parking brake, and then above that section is just your air vent that kind of molds into the background of this dual 12.3-inch screen. Now, a couple features to talk about in the center display. You've got your off-road modes, which is kind of interesting. By clicking the off-road app, you can pull up not only your, different types of pitch and roll and your angle, and you can turn on your off-road cruise control, but you can also turn on your 360-degree camera where it shows you an underbody view of the vehicle. And it just uses fancy software where it will essentially take a photo of what's going on in front of you, and as you're moving forward, it will put that image underneath you. But regardless of how it works, it's really useful if you are rock crawling to know exactly what position that rock is as it's going underneath the vehicle. Now, in the center screen under the comfort settings is also how you adjust your 64 different types of colors for your ambient lighting. Now, I've shown this in other Mercedes products, but it never disappoints. The interior ambient lighting is gorgeous, and I love playing around with the different colors. And under these themes, I've noticed that the colors will actually change as you're driving. So it will kind of soothe through different pinks and blues, and it really makes the interior almost like a symphony of different colors, makes it feel very upscale on the interior. Now, you can also see your fuel consumption and how you've been driving, and various other modes located inside of this MBUX software, including the voice activation where you can say something like, "Hey Mercedes,
how can I help?
What day is Labor Day?"
Labor Day is Monday, September 4th, 2023.
So even stuff like that, where it's almost like a smart home device where you can ask it whatever you want and it will hopefully give you the right answer. Now, I should mention wireless Apple CarPlay and wireless Android Auto is standard on all Mercedes trim levels as well. And the software makes it really easy to bounce in and out of Android Auto or Apple CarPlay by just clicking one button. Now, if you guys want to see some more features of this infotainment screen, I did make a more in-depth video about the MBUX software in my GLE video, and I'm going to link that up on the screen so you guys can check it out if you want to see some of the cool features that are baked into this software. Now, moving below this screen, you've got 4 aluminum air vents, which feel really nice, and then a little bit more of that wood grain dash that extends all the way to the passenger side. And then underneath that is some aluminum with some ambient lighting underneath, which I'm a sucker for ambient lighting. Now, 4-zone climate control is standard on all GLS models as well, and these switches over here are very, very nice to touch. And there's a lot of redundancy baked in here, so you can click on the fan button over here, but then you can also go into your climate menu and adjust the fan speed using the infotainment screen. You also got your auto climate control, your air recirculation, and then you can sync the driver and passenger side. Moving below the climate control, you have that wood grain paneling that extends all the way back to the center armrest. Looks really good, and then you can slide that cover back, and that reveals a wireless charging pad, which is also standard on all trim levels, 2 USB ports, and 2 cup holders. Now, some of the higher trim levels, you can get heated and ventilated cup holders. Here, we just have some regular cup holders. Moving further back, you've got yet another set of redundant controls where it's essentially a mouse pad that you can use to manipulate this 12.3-inch infotainment screen. Now, it's not the easiest to use because it's much easier to just use your hand to manipulate this touchscreen. But if you're driving and you're wanting to, not reach over and constantly have your hand, floating in air as you're swiping through stations, I've actually been noticed that I've been using this touchpad more often because it's easy to cycle through different stations by simply swiping on the top part of the haptic feedback control. And then on the left-hand side of this mouse pad is your toggle for your different drive modes. There's 5 different drive modes here: individual, sport, comfort, eco, and off-road. And then if you get the AMG versions, of course, you have like Sport Plus and different functionality there. Below that button is your 360-degree camera, which is included on all trim levels. And for 2024, they have this 3D view where you can essentially pretty much fly a drone outside of your vehicle. Now, there's no actual drone here. It just uses fancy software to simulate one, but it looks really cool, and the camera quality is really in-depth. I mean, there's pretty much every single angle you want, you can find in this software. Now, there's also a button where you can search for parking spaces, and this car will automatically park itself. Nothing new, but it's nice that they've integrated that here in the GLS. Now, below those buttons in this center arm console area is your settings button and your favorites button. And then on the right-hand side are your quick access buttons for your navigation, radio, and telephone. And then I will say you have a physical volume knob here. So for everybody who doesn't want to use the haptic feedback controls on the steering wheel, you can use a physical volume knob, and it feels really good in the hand. Now, moving further back, you've got this little pad over here where you can rest your palm as you're manipulating the touchpad. And then behind it is your standard air suspension. Every GLS comes with it, and it works pretty well. It's a little bit slower than what I'd like or what I've seen on some other vehicles like the Land Rover Defender, but it works pretty well, and it actually raises the car up quite a bit. It's noticeable on the outside when you see this air suspension kick in. Behind that is your center arm compartment, and you open it up. It opens in the center. You've got 1 USB port. It's a little bit on the smaller side, but it's not bad overall considering there's quite a good amount of storage on this vehicle. Now, moving above you, you have your rear view mirror, of course. But what surprises me is there is no rear view camera mirror. I don't even think you can get that as an option on any GLS, which is odd because there's 3 rows of seats here, and you could easily have 2 heads in the 3rd row blocking your view out the back. And there's a lot of lower priced vehicles that come with a rear view camera mirror, so I kind of wish they integrated that here in the 2024 facelift. Above that is your crystal looking LED lights up above you, and then you have this sunshade that opens up this large panoramic sunroof. Now, this panel sunroof is also standard on all GLS models, and then this thing actually does open up as well. Now, in regards to the seats, they look very nice and they're very comfortable to sit in. They're very similar to a lot of other Mercedes products. Very nice perforated leather. You've got some pretty good thigh support. You've got a pretty good headrest, but I will say it's definitely on the firmer side, so you kind of have to get used to that, but it's not bad overall. and the seats are pretty comfortable to sit in for long road trips. Okay, now jumping into the second row, first off, I like the fact that this door opens really wide. So you have a really wide entrance into the passenger compartment, which makes it easier to load people in and out of the third row. Now, same nice use of materials on the top of the door panel, that wood grain dash, the aluminum buttons. And what surprises me is you can get power operated second row seats if you choose the captain's chair setup for the second row. So that does reduce your seating capacity from 7 down to 6, but that is a no-cost option. But you can manipulate the seats using the controls on the door panel. Moving below that, you have your ambient lighting, of course, the same aluminum buttons for the door handle, and then a storage compartment all the way at the bottom, which can fit like a water bottle and some little snacks here and there. Moving inside, you got the illuminated door seal and then the nice white leather seats, which feel really good to sit in. They kind of feel like bucket seats where they scoop you in, but they don't feel uncomfortable. They're very soft, very plushy. You almost feel like you're sitting in first class or at least business class. You have your own little armrest and a very comfortable place to sit in the second row. Now, legroom is fantastic back there. You're talking 41.9 inches of space behind the first row and then about 40.2 inches of headroom. Now, moving towards the center, there is this odd setup with the cup holders. Since you don't have a bench seat with a center arm console, your cup holders are located kind of right out in the open above the air vents in the second row. And one cup holder is somewhat a decent size. It's kind of on the smaller end, but then the one next to it is even smaller. It's like best for maybe like a Red Bull can. I don't really know why they made the cup holder so small. Maybe it has to do with the ventilation system that's going on underneath. Moving below that, you have 2 air vents, of course, but there's also air vents located in the B pillar of the doors as well. So you have air flowing from multiple areas. And then, like I said, you have 4-zone climate control as standard, so you can control the passenger and driver's seat in the second row independent of each other. Moving below that, there's a little compartment where if you push a button, it opens up 2 USB ports and a little storage compartment for you to put your phone in. Now, there is a small hump in the center, but it's pretty easy to pass through and get into the third row using that opening in the center area. However, a better way to access the third row is using the passenger side, because there is a button located on the top of the seat where if you pull on it, the entire seat will slowly start moving forward to give you greater access into that third row. And it's a pretty wide opening. Now, it takes probably a good 10-15 seconds for it to get to its final position, but once it's there, it's very easy to get into and out of the third row. Now, jumping back there, it's actually not a bad place to be because you have this big greenhouse with these large windows on the left and right hand side, so it makes it feel a little less claustrophobic in the third row. Also, you don't have that middle seat in the second row, so you can actually stretch your legs out a little bit in that third row. In terms of legroom, you're looking about 34.6 inches, and then you've got about 38.9 inches of headroom. Now, I will say, with the second row seats in their furthest back position, there's really barely any space back there. But because the second row has so much legroom, they could easily move forward probably a good 6 to 12 inches and still have pretty decent legroom in the second row and really good legroom in the third row. Now, one odd thing about the third row is there are no third row air vents if you don't get the 5-zone climate control, which is a little bit odd. That said, you do have that pass through in the middle, so the second row air vents can still reach the third row, but I definitely think they still need to include third row air vents. The nice thing is you have 2 USB ports on both sides, you have a cup holder, and then there is soft touch leather padded surfaces for the elbows on the driver and passenger side, which is nice because if you're sitting back there, you're going to want to have something a little bit more comfortable, and it's hard to find soft touch surfaces in the third row, so kudos to Mercedes for including it. Now, getting into the trunk, there's not too much to report back there. You of course have the automatic lift gate, and you've got about 17.4 cubic feet of space behind the third row. Underneath the trunk floor, you have a 19-inch spare tire, and then you have a space where you can remove your tonneau cover and store it in there, so you don't have to just store it in your garage, which is kind of nice. On the right hand side, you have a 12-volt cigarette style power outlet. Unfortunately, there's no household power outlets on the interior. And then there's a set of buttons over there that have some pretty cool functionality. The first button is to raise and lower your suspension when you're trying to load heavy objects into the back. But the other set of buttons are even more interesting. So there are buttons to electronically raise and lower your third row seats. So by the push of a button, it will slide down that heavy to lift headrest and fold the third row down. And in that position, you have about 42.7 cubic feet of space behind the second row. Now, moving to the left-hand side of the trunk, there's another set of buttons, and those are buttons to fold down these second row seats. Yes, you can fold down the second and third row and bring them back up using the buttons in the trunk. That's pretty cool. Not an option I see on a lot of different cars, and an option that is typically reserved for expensive vehicles like the GLS. But that feature is standard on all trim levels. Now, folding down the second and the third row gets you upwards of 84.7 cubic feet of space behind the first row. So as you can see, there's actually quite a bit of features that are included as standard on the base trim level of the GLS. So it's very un-German-like for them to do that, because most of the time you have to pay an arm and a leg just to get simple things like LED headlights. So then the question is, what can you actually option for in this vehicle? Well, there's actually quite a bit, and a lot of it has to do with comfort. So first off, you can get front massaging seats as an option, along with heated armrests and heated center arm console as well. So if you live in a very cold climate, that might be necessary. You can also get optional second row heated seats as well, a heated steering wheel, and like I mentioned earlier, heated and cooled cup holders. You can also get 5-zone climate control, so your third row passengers have their own set of controls. And of course, you can get the air purification and air ionization system that fits inside of the glove compartment and kind of pumps a fragrance inside of the vehicle. Soft closed doors are also another optional feature on the GLS. And then you can also get powered second row sunshades. Now, the standard GLS comes with an MB Tex pleather or fake leather, whereas you can option for a real leather interior. There's also something called the acoustic package, where it will insulate the vehicle even more. You can also get a package where it will have 3D hand gestures for certain functionality. You can also get a heads-up display and an augmented reality navigation system. Okay, now let's get behind the wheel and see how the Mercedes GLS 450 drives. Now, I quickly want to show you the Mercedes key. This is kind of your standard key they've been using for the last few years, and then the back end looks like that. Now, turning this vehicle on, one of the first things you'll notice is the fact that you don't notice this car turning on. And that really has to do with the fact that this has that EQ boost technology, or that mild hybrid system, where you don't really have a cold start in this vehicle. Even when it's been sitting for a couple days, it's going to be a pretty quiet startup. Whether you like that or not, that's kind of what happens when you have this mild hybrid system, because it kind of slowly turns the vehicle on and gets it warmed up. Okay, so setting off in the Mercedes Benz GLS 450. Now, one of the first things you're going to immediately notice is just how quiet the interior cabin is. Now, of course, it's a Mercedes, it's gonna be quiet, but it's even more quiet than I expected. And this one doesn't even have the acoustic package that makes it even quieter. I mean, it's just so serene of an environment. And evidence of this was witnessed a couple days ago. I was driving on the freeway, and the vehicle in front of me started honking at the car in front of it, and I could barely hear that honk. That's how quiet it is on the inside. Like, here I am going 40 miles an hour, and I could probably whisper to you and you guys can hear perfectly fine exactly what I'm saying. It's so serene. And then the quietness is also paired with a very comfortable ride quality. I mean, this thing soaks up bumps like nothing else. Even riding on 21-inch wheels, which have, you know, a thinner profile than some smaller diameter wheels, and this thing still soaks up bumps so well. Feel so comfortable driving down the road. Now, here we are about to drive over some train tracks, and maybe you'll be able to see how comfortable this vehicle really is. I mean, aside from the sound being a little bit louder, you could probably barely tell that we just drove over some train tracks. I mean, driving over those same train tracks in my Ford Bronco would feel like I'm going off-roading. Now, here we are approaching a stoplight, and I want you to pay attention to the start-stop system, because you may not even be able to tell. So here I am going about, all right, at 6 miles an hour, it shut off the engine as I was still coasting to a stop. That's something I've noticed with other Mercedes products as well with this mild hybrid system, is the engine shuts off before you even come to a complete stop. It takes a little bit getting used to, because most vehicles, you come to a complete stop, then the engine shuts off. But what I will say is it's a very quiet start-stop. Here the car just turned on, you could probably barely tell. However, I will say that sometimes when you're coming to, like, for example, right now, somebody pulling into a driveway and I go below 6 miles an hour, but then I need to immediately re-accelerate because I don't come to a complete stop, I feel like there's a little bit of a delay. There's a lag because it takes a second for the engine to kick in. So that's the only times where I find it a little bit annoying, and I wish it was more like a traditional start-stop system, but very smooth overall. Okay, now let's put this vehicle into sport mode as we enter this freeway on-ramp, and let's see how this thing accelerates. and we're at 65. I mean, really not bad considering we were going uphill and it's 91 degrees outside. I mean, one thing that really surprised me about this vehicle is just how powerful this base entry-level engine is. I mean, it says 375 horsepower, but it honestly feels more like 400. This thing has plenty of passing power, plenty of acceleration, and then what's funny is as you're accelerating, it almost has this whooshing sound that comes into the cabin. I'm not really sure what it is. I imagine it's the turbocharger, but it sounds different than every other turbocharger I've heard. So it kind of gives you a cool experience on the inside. It may also be the speakers pumping in a little bit of sound, but it doesn't sound that bad either. And I think this engine is plenty fine for 99% of use cases. Now, of course, a 4-liter V8 twin turbo is better, but do you really need it? I don't think so. This thing has plenty of torque and plenty of get up. Okay, so we're gonna get on this freeway on-ramp one more time and gun it and see how this thing feels. Yeah, this thing is quick. It's a fun car to drive. It really doesn't feel slow for being the entry-level engine. Now, I will say this vehicle on curves and on turns, you can definitely feel the weight. It feels pretty top heavy, very pillowy, very bouncy on the corners. And so I wouldn't recommend taking this on a racetrack. If you do, I would recommend getting the AMG version because it's gonna have that sport tune suspension. This isn't meant for that. Now, I do love the safety tech here. You know, you turn on your cruise control and then this vehicle essentially steers itself and it can even change lanes for you. So for example, you know, I'm changing lanes right now. It's doing all the work. It's changing the lane for me and then it recenters. Now, of course, you do have to hold on to the steering wheel, but it's not super annoying of a system where it makes you constantly have to jiggle the steering wheel or anything like that to, you know, make sure you're paying attention. For the most part, if you have your hand on the steering wheel, it's gonna do the rest of the work and it'll work just fine. Okay, now let's talk about the pricing. Now, full disclosure, 2024 pricing has not yet been released, but I don't imagine it's gonna be dramatically different than the 2023 model year. In 2023, the GLS 450 started just around $81,800, which isn't that bad considering this is the S-Class of SUVs and this one being a 3-row crossover. Now, if you jumped up to the GLS 580, that would bump you up to $105,000. If you chose the GLS 63 with that big hand-built 4-liter twin turbocharged engine, you'd be looking at $139,000. And then if you chose the GLS 600, the Maybach version, that one started at 170 grand. So I imagine for 2024, it might be a few grand here or there extra on top of the 2023 pricing, but it's gonna be somewhere within that range. Now, in terms of safety tech, you actually have quite a few features as standard. You've got emergency braking with pedestrian detection. You've got blind spot monitoring as standard, active high beam assist where it will automatically turn off and on depending on oncoming traffic. You get 7 airbags on the inside and you've got the 360-degree camera as standard on all GLS models. Now, of course, adaptive cruise control and lane centering and steering assist are all optional features. In addition, the tap on the turn signal to change lanes for you, that is also optional. And then rear side curtain airbags are optional as well, which is a little surprising to me. I thought that would be included as standard. You've also got active blind spot assist, so if you happen to be merging into another vehicle, this car will kind of merge you out of the way so that you avoid hitting that vehicle next to you. So a few extra optional features that you have to pay for if you want the Mercedes GLS to be fully equipped with all the safety tech. Now, in terms of reliability, US News and JD Power rates it an average at 75 out of 100, and from the factory, you get a 4-year, 50,000-mile limited and powertrain warranty. Okay, so what are my overall thoughts on the 2024 Mercedes Benz GLS 450? Well, honestly, a couple things surprised me about this vehicle, and that is how many things came standard on the base entry trim level. I mean, we're talking LED headlights, blind spot monitoring, you got that large panoramic sunroof, 2nd and 3rd row power seats. Those are things that historically Mercedes would have charged an arm and a leg for, and they're including it as standard on a sub $100,000 3-row Mercedes SUV. Now, in terms of the facelift, I do like what they did, but I wonder if it's enough to compete with some of the latest competition out out there. The BMW X7 was recently facelifted, and it's a pretty controversial design, so perhaps it's best that they stuck to their roots and made it a more upscale design on the outside instead of going pretty radical. At the same time, you've got the Cadillac Escalade, the Lincoln Navigator, Audi Q7, so this field is cramped with a lot of competition, but I think the Mercedes holds its own. It's got that brand cachet, it's got that handsome exterior upscale appearance. I think this will sell very well over time. But what are your thoughts on the newly facelifted 2024 GLS? Would you take this over the competition, and why? I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. If you did, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for all of the weekly car videos. Also check me out on all the social media at Schwazy_. Until next time, everybody, I hope you stay Schwazy, stay healthy, have a wonderful day.